The Chamber of Standing had never been so silent. Hundreds of observers sat frozen in their seats, their eyes fixed on the small human who stood battered and tear-stained in the center of the white Circle. Master Trainer Vershith had not moved for several minutes, his compound eyes reflecting the arena lights as he studied Yuna with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. Then, he did something that no one in the chamber expected. His forward legs bent at the joint, lowering his massive body toward the floor, and his head dipped in a gesture that every Kathrani present recognized immediately. Gasps echoed through the stands, clicking. Sounds of shock and disbelief rippled through the insectoid observers. This was the Kathrani bow, not the formal acknowledgement of a superior to a subordinate, but the deep bow of a warrior acknowledging an equal in combat. VO Sheth had never bowed to a candidate in 3,000 years of service. "Do you understand what you are witnessing?" he called out to the assembly, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "I designed the trial of first standing to find the limits of other species, to expose their weaknesses and break their spirits, and I believed I had seen everything possible." He rose from his bow but kept his eyes on Yuna. "In 3,000 years, no candidate has completed this trial without movement, without sound, without yielding, and yet this human, this representative of a species I considered unworthy of the Vanguard program, has done what no one before her could do." He turned to address the crowd directly. She did not merely endure the sensory assault. She transcended it, and she did not merely survive the physical torture. She accepted it as the price of standing, and when I attacked her mind with the truth of her species' failures, she did something no candidate has ever done before. His voice took on a note of something that might have been wonder. "She agreed with me. And then she showed me why that made her stronger rather than weaker." Vershith returned his attention to Yuna, who still stood motionless in the center of the circle. "Humans have no natural weapons," he said. "No armor, no enhanced senses, no psychic abilities, no biological adaptations for combat or survival. And by every metric we use to evaluate warrior potential, your species should be at the bottom of the rankings." He paused. "But you carry something we cannot measure. A stubbornness that borders on madness. A willingness to suffer not for personal glory, but for those who will come after you. And a capacity to transform weakness into strength that defies all logical analysis." He raised his voice so that every observer could hear clearly. "The trial of first standing is complete, and Sergeant Unipark of Earth has passed." The chamber erupted in sound, clicks and rumbles and whistles from a dozen different species, some expressing disbelief and others something closer to respect. Vershith raised a limb for silence. "She is the first human in history to complete the Vanguard program's entry trial, and she will not be the last, because she has shown us that we were measuring the wrong things all along." He gestured toward the edge of the circle. "You may step out now." "Sergeant Park." Yuna lifted her right foot for the first time in over 6 hours, and immediately her body began to fail her. Legs had locked in place for so long that the muscles had stiffened beyond normal function, and the accumulated trauma of the venom and the sensory assault crashed over her like a wave. She stumbled forward, and for a moment it seemed she would collapse onto the arena floor, but before she could fall, massive arms caught her thorn. The Dravar, who had mocked her on her first day, had vaulted over the arena barrier and crossed the floor with surprising speed. He held her upright with a gentleness that seemed impossible for his enormous frame. "How?" he asked, and his deep voice carried genuine wonder rather than mockery. "How did you do that?" Yuna looked up at his armored face and managed to smile through her cracked and swollen lips. "Humans have a saying," she said. "We can do anything for a little while, and we just keep extending what a little while means." Tharn made a rumbling sound that might have been laughter. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I thought your species was weak, but I was wrong. And I would be honored to train alongside you." Other candidates were descending from the stands now, approaching Yuna with expressions of respect that had been entirely absent when she first arrived. The Telmari, with their forearms, offered traditional gestures of acknowledgement. The Veloth, including Kethral, who had warned her to withdraw, projected feelings of admiration that she could sense despite her lack of psychic ability. Even the Kethrani instructors clicked their mandibles in patterns that the universal translator identified as formal recognition. Vosh approached her one final time. "I have spent 3,000 years believing that humans had no place in the Vanguard program," he said. "And I designed this trial specifically to prove that belief correct. But you have shown me that I was measuring worthiness by the wrong standards." He performed another bow, shorter than the first, but no less meaningful. "You have earned your place here, Sergeant Park, not despite your humanity, but because of it. And I expect you will accomplish things that even I cannot predict." Yuna straightened her spine despite the pain and returned the bow as best she could. "Thank you, Master Trainer." Vershith made a clicking sound that the translator rendered as amusement. "Do not thank me yet, because the training that follows this trial is far more difficult than anything you have faced today. And I will not show you any favoritism. I would not want you to." Something like a smile crossed the ancient Kethrani's scarred face. "No," he said. "I do not believe you would." As Yuna was helped from the chamber by her new allies, she thought of her grandmother and all the ancestors who had endured impossible hardships so that she could stand here today. She thought of all the humans who had tried before her and failed. Their sacrifices not wasted, but transformed into the foundation upon which she had built her victory. And she thought of all the humans who would come after her, walking through doors that she had opened by refusing to move from a single white circle on an alien space station. She had faced the alien trainer's test. She had passed without moving an inch, and in doing so, she had changed everything. Vershith began to speak, and his words cut deeper than any insect bite. "I have studied your species extensively," he said, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. "And I know things about humanity that most humans prefer to forget." He circled her slowly, his compound eyes never leaving her face. "Your species discovered nuclear weapons and immediately used them against your own kind, vaporizing hundreds of thousands of civilians in an instant. And then you built more, enough to destroy your entire planet many times over." Yuna felt something cold settle in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "You have waged countless wars against each other over territory, over resources, over differences in ideology and belief. And you have killed billions of your own species in conflicts that accomplished nothing." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the individual facets of his compound eyes. "You enslaved members of your own species based on the color of their skin, treating them as property rather than persons. And this practice continued for centuries while your philosophers wrote about freedom and dignity." The words hit like physical blows, and Yuna understood now why this was. The phase that broke candidates, this was not pain that could be endured through mental discipline. This was truth. Your species has driven countless other species on your homeworld to extinction through carelessness and greed, Vershith continued. And you continue to poison your own planet even as you search for new worlds to colonize and exploit. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the silent chamber. You were admitted to this program as a political gesture. Nothing more, because the Galactic Council wanted to appear inclusive. But everyone knows the truth. Humanity is a failed species, violent and self-destructive. And you have no place among true warriors. Yuna felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. And she did not try to stop them. Your grandmother, Vershith said. And the use of this personal detail struck like a knife. survived a war in which humans killed millions of other humans, and you carry her memory as a badge of honor. But have you considered what it says about your species, that such survival was necessary in the first place? The tears spilled down Yuna's cheeks, tracing paths through the sweat and grime on her face. She did not wipe them away, because doing so would require moving her hands. And she had vowed not to move. Vershith continued. For another hour, he spoke of human trafficking and child labor. He spoke of famines caused by political indifference and diseases left untreated because cures were not profitable. He spoke of the countless ways humans had failed to live up to their own stated ideals. The gap between what humanity claimed to be and what it actually was, and Yuna listened to every word. She did not try to deny any of it, did not try to explain or justify or deflect. She simply stood in the center of the circle, with tears streaming down her face, and listened to the truth about her species. When Vershith finally stopped speaking, the chamber was utterly silent. The observers in the stand seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see if the human would finally break. Yuna opened her mouth and spoke, her voice steady despite the tears. You are correct about all of it. Ah. Ripple of surprise passed through the audience. This was not the response anyone had expected. Humans have done terrible things. Yuna continued. We have waged war and practiced slavery and destroyed our environment. And we have failed to live up to our ideals in countless ways. She met Vershith's compound eyes directly. But you missed something important in your assessment of my species. And what is that? The master trainer asked. We remember. Vershith's head tilted slightly. We remember every atrocity, every failure, every time we fell short of who we wanted to be, Yuna said. We write it down in our history books and we teach it to our children. Not to celebrate it, but to ensure it is never forgotten. She took a breath, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. We carry that weight, Master Trainer, the full burden of all our sins and failures. And we carry it willingly, because we know that forgetting would be worse than remembering. Our voice grew stronger. Other species might bury their shameful history or pretend it never happened. But humans choose to remember, and we choose to be better. And that is not weakness. She straightened her spine despite the pain that still coursed through her body. That is the heaviest burden any species can bear. The knowledge of what you have been and the commitment to become something more. And we bear it standing. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Rush had not moved, his compound eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that felt almost physical in the stands. The observers remained frozen, waiting for the ancient master trainer's response. Finally, Vershith spoke, and his voice carried a note that Yuna had not heard before. In 3,000 years of administering this trial, no candidate has ever responded to the psychological assault in this manner. He circled her once more. But this time, his movements were different, almost reverent. They defend themselves, he continued. They make excuses. They blame circumstances or claim that their species has changed. But none have ever simply accepted the truth and transformed it into a source of strength. He stopped in front of her again. You carry your species' failures as a burden to be borne, rather than a shame to be hidden. And you believe that this burden makes you stronger rather than weaker. I do not just believe it, Yuna replied. I know it. Vershith was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed once more. The trial is nearly complete, he announced to the chamber. But one question remains to be answered, and the answer will determine everything. He leaned closer, his ancient face just inches from hers. Why do you want this, Sergeant Yuna Park? And why do you refuse to break? Yuna looked into his compound eyes and gave him the only answer she had. Because someone has to be first. And if I break now, the next human will have an even harder path. And the one after that harder still. But if I stand, then I make it possible for others to follow. She paused. I am not fighting for myself, Master Trainer, I am fighting for every human who will come after me, and I will not let them down." The silence returned, heavier than before, and Yuna waited for what would come next. The second phase began without warning. Rashith gestured to an attendant near the arena's edge, and a panel in the floor slid open with a soft mechanical hiss from the darkness below. Something muffled. Yuna heard them before she saw them, a skittering, clicking sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And then the first wave of insects emerged into the light. They were small, perhaps the size of her thumb, with segmented bodies that gleamed. With an oily sheen, their mandibles clicked rapidly as they poured out of the floor panel in a stream of chitinous bodies, hundreds of them, thousands. Vershith. Stingers, the Master Trainer announced to the audience. Native to the Kethrani homeworld, where they evolved alongside my species for millions of years. He turned his compound eyes toward Yuna. Their venom causes extreme pain but no permanent damage. And to the Kethrani, they are merely a nuisance. But to species without natural venom resistance, he paused, they are something far worse. The insects swarmed toward Yuna's feet, and she felt the first of them begin to climb her legs. Tiny legs gripped her skin through the thin fabric of her training uniform, and they moved with purpose, spreading across her body like a living carpet. The first bite came on her calf, and Yuna understood immediately why this was considered torture. The pain was unlike anything she had experienced, a burning, searing agony that radiated outward from the tiny wounded, felt like someone had pressed a hot coal against her skin. And the sensation did not fade, but intensified with each passing second. Then came the second bite, and the third, and within moments the insects were biting her everywhere: her legs, her arms, her back, her neck. Each bite added another layer of fire to her nervous system until her entire body felt like it was being consumed by flames in the stands. The assembled observers watched with expressions ranging from morbid fascination to uncomfortable sympathy. The Dravar candidate, who had mocked her on arrival, a warrior named Tharn, leaned forward in his seat with his small eyes fixed on her face. He was waiting for her to collapse, waiting to see the human broken. Yuna did not move. She stood in the center of the circle with insects covering her skin and venom burning through her veins. And she did not move. Her mind retreated to a place her grandmother had taught her to find, a quiet space inside herself where the body's pain became something distant and manageable. The pain was real. She acknowledged it fully, but it did not have to control her. She began to name the elements of the periodic table: hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. Each element was an anchor, a fixed point in the chaos of sensation that kept her mind from drowning in the pain. The insects continued to bite. 1 hour passed. Then to Yuna's skin had swollen in angry welts where the stingers had penetrated, and her body was flushed with the effort of processing the venom. Sweat poured down her face and dripped from her chin. But her hands remained at her sides and her feet remained planted. She thought of marathon runners who pushed through the wall of exhaustion to find something beyond, the place where the body wanted to stop, but the mind refused to allow it. She thought of soldiers who had survived prisoner camps through nothing but mental discipline, their bodies starving and broken, but their spirits undefeated. She thought of every human who had ever faced impossible odds and chosen to endure rather than surrender. The insects were finally recalled, retreating back into the floor panel with the same skittering efficiency with which they had emerged. Yuna stood alone in the circle, her body a map of swollen welts and burning pain, but her position unchanged from where she had started. Vorsh approached her again, and this time his movements were slower, more contemplative. "You should have collapsed," he said, his voice lacking its earlier edge of contempt. "Every biological model we have of human physiology indicates that the pain threshold for your species should have been exceeded within the first 20 minutes. He circled her, examining the welts that covered her exposed skin. And yet here you stand, he continued. Not through any physical adaptation, not through any biological advantage, but through something I cannot measure or quantify. Una finally spoke, her voice hoarse but steady. You study the human body, she said, but you do not understand the human spirit. Vershith stopped his circling and fixed his compound eyes on her face. The human spirit, he repeated. Yes, I've heard this phrase before, from every human candidate who has stood in this circle. And they all said the same thing before they broke. Then they did not understand it either. Something flickered in those ancient compound eyes. Something that might have been curiosity or might have been the first stirrings of doubt. You truly believe you are different from those who came before you. I do not know if I am different, Una replied. But I know that I will not break, not here, not from this, and not from whatever else you have planned. Vershith was silent for a long moment in the stands. The observers had grown quiet. Sensing that something significant was happening in the arena below finally, the master trainer spoke again. The third phase is the phase that breaks everyone, he said. Not the body, but the mind. And it has destroyed warriors far stronger and more experienced than you. Then begin it. Vershith tilted his head in a gesture that might have been acknowledgement. Very well. Sergeant Una Park, but remember that you asked for this. And remember that what comes next cannot be undone. He dismissed the attendants with a wave of his forward legs, and the arena fell into complete silence. Una watched him approach, her body screaming with residual pain, but her mind clear and focused. Whatever was coming, she would face it the same way she had faced everything else, standing still, moving forward, refusing to break. The days passed slowly as Una watched candidate after candidate enter the chamber of standing. Some emerged victorious, their pride intact and their place in the program secured. Others were carried out on medical platforms, their bodies broken or their minds shattered by whatever horrors they had faced inside. One Dravar candidate, a massive warrior named Grath, who had mocked Una openly in the dining hall, stumbled out of the chamber with tears streaming down his armored face. He withdrew from the program that same evening and boarded a transport back to his homeworld. Una watched and learned what she could. From the aftermath, the trial seemed to be different for each species, tailored to exploit their specific weaknesses. And this meant she could not truly prepare for what awaited her. All she could do was strengthen her mind and trust in her training. On the final day, a Kathrani attendant came to her quarters before dawn. Human candidate. The attendant clicked. Your trial begins in 1 hour, and the master trainer expects you in the chamber of standing. Una rose from her meditation position and dressed in the simple training uniform she had been issued. She ate a small meal, drank water, and spent the remaining time in quiet contemplation. When the hour arrived, she walked to the chamber with steady steps. The chamber of standing was larger than she had imagined. A vast circular arena with tiered seating that rose up into darkness. The seats were packed with spectators, hundreds of them. Candidates and instructors, and even species she did not recognize. This was apparently an event of some significance. At the center of the arena floor, a white circle had been painted, perhaps 10 meters in diameter. Vershith stood at the edge of this circle, his ancient form somehow more imposing than ever. Sergeant Una Park, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. You stand before us as the first human to face the trial of first standing in 17 years. And I wonder if you will last longer than the last one. Scattered clicking sounds that might have been laughter rippled through the Kathrani observers. Una walked to the center of the white circle and stood at attention. The rules are simple, Vershith continued. You will remain within this circle while I test your worthiness. And you may defend yourself, but you cannot leave the circle. And you may yield at any time by speaking the word, enough. He paused, his compound eyes studying her with an intensity that felt almost physical. No candidate has ever died during this trial, but many have been permanently injured. And the trial ends when I decide it ends. Yuna nodded once. I understand. Then we begin. The lights in the chamber suddenly intensified, becoming blindingly bright, and Yuna's eyes burned with the sudden assault. She closed them instinctively. But the light was so powerful that it seemed to penetrate her eyelids simultaneously. A sound erupted from speakers hidden throughout the arena, a shrieking frequency that vibrated through her skull and made her teeth ache. The floor beneath her feet began to pulse with vibrations at a frequency that made her bones resonate painfully. This was sensory assault, she realized, designed to overwhelm species that lacked biological adaptations to filter extreme stimuli. The Drovar had natural membranes that could dim their vision. The Kethrani could seal their auditory channels. But humans had no such protection. Sienna kept her eyes closed and focused on her breathing in through the nose. 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth. 4 counts. Her grandmother had taught her this technique during the worst storms, when the wind and rain and thunder had terrified the young Yuna beyond reason. The storm cannot hurt you if you do not let it inside, her grandmother had said. Let it rage outside while you remain calm within. The sensory assault continued minutes, stretched into what felt like hours. The light burned against her closed eyelids. The sound drilled into her brain, and the vibrations made her muscles spasm with the effort of remaining still. But Yuna did not move. She counted prime numbers in her head to give her mind something to focus on besides the pain. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23. When she ran out of prime numbers she could easily recall, she switched to naming the bones in the human body: cranium, mandible, clavicle, scapula, humerus, radius. Alma. The assault continued. Yuna felt sweat dripping down her face and her muscles trembling with exhaustion. But her feet remained planted exactly where they had been when the trial began. She thought of the astronauts who had endured extreme G-forces and centrifuge training, their bodies crushed by simulated gravity that no human was designed to withstand. She thought of the mountaineers who had climbed Everest, their lungs burning in the thin air as their bodies slowly died from lack of oxygen. She thought of her grandmother, starving and freezing in a war-torn land, walking mile after mile toward a safety that seemed to exist only in hope. Humans had no natural armor. Humans had no biological adaptations for extreme environments. The humans had something else, something that could not be measured or quantified. They had the stubborn, unreasonable refusal to quit after what felt like an eternity. The sensory assault stopped. The lights returned to normal. The sound faded, and the vibrations chased. Yuna opened her eyes slowly, blinking away tears and adjusting to the sudden calm. Vershith stood before her, closer than he had been before, his compound eyes reflecting her battered image. 2 hours, he said, and there was something in his clicking voice that she could not identify. The sensory trial lasted 2 hours. And you did not scream. Yuna said nothing. Humans always scream, Vershith continued. Every human candidate I have tested has screamed within the first 30 minutes. But you remained silent. Still Yuna said nothing. She understood instinctively that this was not the time for words. Vershith circled her slowly, studying her the way a scientist might study an unexpected result in an experiment. Your species has no sensory adaptations, he observed. No way to filter the assault, no biological mechanism to reduce the pain. And yet you endured it through sheer will. He stopped in front of her again. Interesting, he said. But the sensory trial is merely the beginning. And what comes next will be far worse. Yuna met his compound eyes without flinching. Her body ached, her head pounded, and her muscles trembled with exhaustion. But she had not moved, she had not screamed, and whatever came next, she would face it the same way. The master trainer turned to address the crowd. The first phase is complete, he announced. And the human candidate has passed, but the trial continues. He turned back to Yuna, and in his ancient eyes she saw something that might have been respect, or might have been anticipation. Let us see how much more you can endure. Sergeant Yuna Park. Yuna planted her feet more firmly in the center of the circle and prepared herself for the next assault. She had come too far to break now. The transport ship shuddered as it docked with Station Vorth 9. And Sergeant Yuna Park felt her stomach tighten with something between excitement and dread. She had trained her entire life for this moment, had pushed her body and mind beyond every limit Earth's military academies could devise. And now she stood on the threshold of the most prestigious combat training facility in 12 star systems. The Galactic Combat Academy had produced legendary warriors for 3,000 years. And in all that time, not a single human had ever completed its elite Vanguard program. Yuna intended to be the first. Docking bay doors slid open with a hiss of pressurized air, and she stepped onto the metal grating of the station's arrival platform. Immediately, she felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes upon her. A group of Dravar stood near the far wall, their massive bodies covered in natural armor plates that gleamed under the harsh station lights. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall, and their thick arms could crush steel beams without effort. They looked at Yuna the way a mountain might look at a pebble beyond them. A cluster of Telmari candidates practiced combat forms with fluid grace, their forearms moving in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. Their movements created a kind of deadly dance, and Yuna knew that any one of them could strike from 4 directions simultaneously. Near the observation windows, 3 Velev sat in perfect stillness, their pale bodies motionless, but their minds undoubtedly active. The psychic species could project mental attacks that bypassed all physical defenses, and they were said to drive opponents mad with fear before a single blow was exchanged. Yuna walked past all of them with her back straight and her eyes forward. She was smaller than every candidate present, softer, slower, and weaker in nearly every measurable way. Her skin could not stop a blade. Her reflexes could not match the Telmari, and her mind had no psychic defenses against the Veleth. And yet she was here. A Kethrani administrator approached her, the insectoid alien's compound eyes reflecting her image 1,000 times over. "You are the human," the administrator said. And it was not a question. Sergeant Yuna Park, reporting for Vanguard candidacy, she replied. The administrator made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "Follow me to the orientation chamber, human candidate, and try not to fall behind." The station's corridors seemed designed to intimidate, with ceilings that stretched high enough to accommodate the largest species and walls lined with holographic displays showing legendary graduates. In Combatuna noticed that none of the displayed warriors were human. Orientation chamber was a vast, circular room where all candidates had gathered, and Yuna found herself a spot near the back where she could observe without being observed. The other candidates gave her a wide berth, not out of respect, but out of something like embarrassed pity. She heard whispers in translator-filtered voices. They actually let a human in this year. Political gesture. Nothing more. She will not survive the first week. Yuna kept her face neutral and her breathing steady. Let them talk. The chamber fell silent as a figure entered from the main doors, and Yuna felt the atmosphere shift from casual contempt to genuine fear. Master Trainer Vershith was ancient by Kethrani standards, his carapace scarred from 1,000 battles and his compound eyes holding a depth of experience that seemed almost infinite. He moved with the careful precision of a predator who had long ago stopped needing to prove himself. Candidates. His voice clicked and resonated through the chamber's acoustic systems. You have come to Vorth 9 because you believe yourselves worthy of the Vanguard designation. But belief is not enough here, and reputation means nothing within these walls. He paused. and his eyes seem to find every candidate individually before formal training begins. You will each face the trial of first standing, and this trial will determine whether you deserve to breathe the air of my station. A ripple of tension passed through the assembled candidates, and Yuna noticed several veterans in attendance exchange nervous glances, whatever this trial was. Even experienced warriors feared it. The trial will begin tomorrow, Vershith continued, and you will face it in order of your galactic ranking, which means the human candidate will go last. More whispers. And Yuna understood the cruelty of this arrangement. She would have to watch every other candidate face the trial first. A dread building with each passing day. Vershith turned and left without another word, and the chamber erupted in anxious conversation. Yuna slipped away to find her assigned quarters, a small room clearly designed for species much larger than humans. She sat on the oversized sleeping platform and allowed herself a moment of doubt. Her grandmother had survived the worst war in Korean history, had walked through fire and starvation and loss, and had emerged with a spirit that nothing could break. The body can endure what the mind permits, her grandmother had always said, and the mind can endure anything if the heart has purpose. Yuna closed her eyes and centered herself. A knock at her door interrupted her meditation, and she opened it to find a Veloth candidate standing in the corridor. His pale skin seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, and his large dark eyes held an expression she could not read. "I am Kethril," he said, "and I have come to warn you." Yuna stepped aside to let him enter, curious despite her caution. "Warn me about what?" "The trial of first standing," Kethril said, his voice carrying an undertone of genuine concern. "Is not what you think it is? And Master Trainer Vershith designed it specifically to break candidates like you. Candidates like me. Humans," he clarified. "Your species has been trying to join the Vanguard program for decades, and Vershith has never allowed one to pass. Not because they lacked skill, but because he believes humans do not belong among warriors." Yuna felt a cold anger settle in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "What does the trial involve?" Kethril's dark eyes flickered with something like pity. "I cannot tell you the specifics because we are forbidden from sharing that information. But I can tell you this. Your kind cannot endure what is coming, and there is no shame in withdrawing before you are broken." "Why are you telling me this?" The Veloth was quiet for a moment. "Because I have touched your mind. Just briefly, and I sense something in you that I do not understand. And I would hate to see that something destroyed for nothing." He left without waiting for a response, and Yuna stood alone in her quarters with his words echoing in her thoughts. She could withdraw, she could return to Earth and tell them she was not ready, that she needed more training, that the time was not right. No one would blame her. She thought of her grandmother, of the weight of history she carried, of every human who had tried and failed before her. She thought of the contempt in those alien eyes, the casual assumption that her species simply could not measure up. Yuna Park sat down on her sleeping platform, closed her eyes, and began to prepare her mind for whatever was coming. She would not withdraw. She would not break. She would face the alien trainer's test and show them all what a human could endure.